a very, very serious phase and a new phase in the struggle against the fascist British National Party. It's going to be the clarion call of this meeting tonight. Because if you didn't really understand the election of two BNP MEPs as a serious breakthrough, then I want to give you one more statistic which I think is shocking and incredibly worrying, and it's this. In 2005 general election, there were just 3 constituencies across the whole country where the BNP won more than 10% of the vote. If you look at the results from this year's European elections, you will find that there are now 53 constituencies in which the BNP won 10% or more of the vote, and 13 extra where they won between 9 and 10% of the vote. 53 constituencies around the country. I also want to say the following, that in places like Barking and Dagenham, they gained 19.4%, Stoke 17.6%, Thurrock 17.5%, and Barnsley 16.7%. They've now become the 4 BNP target seats in the general election. And I was shocked this morning when I heard a young comrade speak up in the meeting and said that the BNP vote wasn't a racist vote, it was a protest vote. I just don't believe it. I'm sorry. If you want to protest, there are many versions to protest. You could have voted Green. You could have voted no to EU. You could have voted SLP. You could have voted anything else. The BNP vote was by and large based around racism. I think we have to be absolutely honest about that. We can't duck that question. I want to give you 2 statistics which I think are worth noting. And this comes from a very important survey that was conducted on the election day, where 34,000 people, 32,268 people were sampled as they went in. And of them, 985 were members of the BNP. And when you look at the question about racism, it hits you in the face just how racist those BNP voters were. Compared to, when it comes to the question of immigration, 90% of BNP members said they were against immigration, compared to 49% of all other voters, almost double. When it comes to the question, has immigration benefited the country, only 4% of BNP voters thought it benefited those countries. More disturbingly, 31% of BNP members believed there was a difference of intelligence between the average black Briton and the average white Briton, and 20% of the BNP vote, when everyone else's vote didn't even bring it up, thought that the Holocaust was exaggerated. This is a hard, nasty, racist vote, which the BNP are trying to capitalise on it, and there's dangers within that. Secondly, I want to argue that it's important to put the BNP's vote into some kind of perspective, and it's important to say this. Although the vote is worrying and scary, the BNP did not witness a massive surge in support. In fact, its share of the vote increased by only 1.3%. Now that is 1.3% too much, I understand that, but it's not a huge surge towards the BNP. In fact, the actual number of votes for the BNP in the 2 seats it won was actually lower than it was in 2004. So how did they win 2 seats then? Well, I think there are 2 key reasons for this. First is the collapse of the Labour vote. You see, Labour came 3rd behind UKIP in the European elections, and they polled just 15.7% of the vote. When I was in the Labour Party, we were told that under Michael Foot, you could not get a lower vote, and that was 23% of the vote. Well, Gordon Brown managed to lower that by a lot, by getting 15.7%. Secondly, we are seeing at the same time a huge hemorrhaging in the number of people now that are going out to vote in Britain. In fact, only 33% of people voted in the European elections, and therefore you see a combination of a lowering of the numbers of people turning out to vote, and the collapse of the Labour vote allows the BNP to sneak through. And I do have to say this, and I want to put it on public record, that I thought it was a disgrace that sections of the Labour Party and an organisation called Searchlight attacked Peter Hain when Peter Hain put a warning in the Guardian saying the BNP were a threat, and they were saying that Peter Hain was talking up the threat of the BNP. We had every right to talk up the threat of the BNP. About the voting figures, he was absolutely correct, and I think it's a danger. We cannot play, this is not a game of politics. You see, it's all very well in constituency votes when you say, oh, the Tories vote is not that big in order to get electoral advantage. When you start talking about the BNP, it's a different category. It should not be done. I want to say something else. The result of the election saw a wave of spontaneous and semi-organised protests across the country, and they were absolutely fantastic. A fantastic response to it, and probably the best was the egging of Nick Griffin at Parliament. Absolutely fantastic. about I've heard that Nick Griffin didn't like his eggs being scrambled when they hit him. He said that he preferred them to be his whites to be separated from his yolks. I've got loads more jokes like that. We could go on tonight if you want to see the joke was on him. There's just anyway, enough of my awful jokes, but I've practiced them a lot on different things. But I'm glad we done it. No one thinks this is the way to defeat the BNP, but what it did is it just showed the BNP that if you try and pose as respectable politicians, we're going to come for you and we're going to drive you off the streets. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. It wasn't a bad start, was it? It wasn't a bad start. It uplifted morale. I still think the Sun's game of Egg Griffin was a fantastic thing. And I'd have to say this to some MPs. When John Connors attacked it, saying what was the point in doing that? He was to the right, absolutely to the right of every single Tory politician who welcomed it, including Anne Whittaker, who said if you can't get a few eggs in the politician, you're in the wrong business. So come on, Labour, accept it. It's not a big violent cry. It was just a mass protest that was good. And I think the vote of the BNP, the protests that have taken place, have begun to open up big questions about what kind of party is the BNP, who votes for them, and most importantly, how do we stop them? And I want to make one thing very, 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 very clear, is that really the BNP's growth is speeding up very, very quickly. In 1999, Nick Griffin was elected the leader of the BNP. In that same year, the BNP just gained 1% of the vote in the European elections and gained just 0.19% of the vote in the 2001 election. And what we've seen take place both in Britain and in Europe is a growth of fascist organisations. Really, you've seen it since the early 1980s. Now, I haven't got time to talk about all of them, but I think there are two things that are common. They've come about at different points in the last 25, 30 years, but they have two things behind them, each gains of the fascist parties across Europe. One is the rise of racism, and that racism being made respectable by mainstream politicians. Secondly, it comes about with the collapse of the centre parties, and I think you can spell that out in Italy, in France, in Britain, and in Belgium. I think it's absolutely important we see that. We have to also understand that this is true of the BNP as well. Its electoral support has grown on the back of an increase in racism. In asylum seeker racism, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the rise of Islamophobia after 9/11 and 7/7, and the backlash we've seen recently against migrant workers. Now, in the little article I've done for the ISJ, what I thought was very obvious is actually all of these things are not from below. They begin with the press, the politicians, and the media. And I just want to say you start to see them burst through, whether it's a police officer blaming Asian kids for violence in Oldham, whether it's Polly Toynbee declaring independence, she's proud to be a homophobe, an Islamophobe. Proud to be an Islamophobe, is what Polly Toynbee said. Would she say, I'm proud to be an anti-Semite? I'm proud to hate black people? Of course she wouldn't do that, but she thinks Muslim people are fair game, and when the liberal intelligentsia think that's okay, you can bet your bottom that it legitimises what the BNP can get away with, and all the rest of it. When Gordon Brown starts raising the jokes over British jobs for British workers, don't start blaming poor oil workers for doing it. He was the one who raised it, he's an established politician, and he's opened the door for racism and backlashes and all the rest of it, and that's how the BNP because of the basis of Labour collapse and this economic crisis. I was in Lancashire just before the election, and this ad van went by with 3 pigs at a trough, all eating the food, and at the back of the pigs had Labour, Liberal, Tory. And as it went by, people started clapping and cheering. And as the van went by, the bottom right-hand corner was vote BNP, and many people stopped. But they were able to tap into that, the idea that the political class is ripping people off. So we have to see that Nick Griffin was right. He says the BNP, the only thing he's ever been right about is the BNP entered this election under the perfect storm. For them, it was absolutely the perfect storm, and they were aided and abetted by people who should know better. The second point I want to argue is the BNP a fascist party? Again, I've just been talking to someone at the Paul Gilroy meeting. Someone said they're not a fascist party. You see, I think we have to say that's just not true. And I want to go through several things. First of all, I think we have to say what is fascism before we start an argument. I'll tell you what fascism is when I was growing up and my dad told me to tidy my room, I called him a fascist. My dad wasn't a fascist, right? That's just absolutely it. It's not a term of abuse we just use. We throw in your boss, go, get back to work now, you fascist. You may feel like that. That's not good enough explanation. You have to have a scientific explanation.